We have some disturbing breaking news. Donald Trump's latest act of authoritarianism marks a major escalation and hints ominously at terrible things to come. Over the objection of California's Democratic governor, Gavin Newsom, and local leaders, Donald Trump is defying precedent and tradition and potentially the law by deploying the California National Guard to Los Angeles to quell protests. And this comes after hours of threatening to send in the National Guard and even the Marines to crush protesters. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we got a couple of clips to look at, starting with this one here.
Amanda Palacios joins us live from downtown Los Angeles with the breaking update. Amanda.
Josh and Irene, we've seen a growing National Guard presence here in downtown LA. Throughout the morning, we've seen them walking up and down Alameda Street. And just behind me here, you could see them stationed alongside their vehicles near the federal building as another protest is expected to take place later today near City Hall. This follows President Trump's deployment of 2,000 National Guard members in response to a series of immigration protests across the city. This is new video from overnight showing the troops arriving. They stopped at City Hall after driving through Paramount, then ended up here at the federal building. Meantime, this follows another night of protest.
Amanda Palacios.
All right, folks, there you have it. Donald Trump is sending in the National Guard over the objection of California's Governor Gavin Newsom. We'll get into this, but just as a context for the protests, as New York Times has a handy visual timeline of the LA immigration protests and federal responses. Donald Trump has called on the National Guard to deploy to Los Angeles in an extraordinary show of force after 2 days of isolated clashes between federal law enforcement agents and people protesting immigration raids in the area. Here is a timeline of the preceding events. Friday, around 3 p.m. Pacific, a crowd of dozens gathered in the Fashion District near downtown Los Angeles after immigration and customs enforcement agents appeared at an apparel manufacturer there. Dozens of federal agents arrived in riot gear to disperse the crowd and clear a path for 2 white passenger vans leaving the area. The operation was one of 3 immigration raids on Friday in Los Angeles. You have footage there. Later in the afternoon, hundreds of protesters gathered outside the Los Angeles Federal Building, calling for an end to immigration raids in the city. Officers from the Department of Homeland Security fired pepper balls at the protesters before the Los Angeles Police Department dispersed the crowd. More than 100 people were arrested on Friday, according to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Saturday, June 7th. On Saturday morning, separate clashes broke out between protesters and law enforcement officers in Paramount, a small city about 20 miles south of downtown Los Angeles, amid rumors that immigration agents plan to raid a Home Depot in the area. Protesters kicked and threw objects at law enforcement vehicles, while officers deployed tear gas. Pictures there. Later that day, tensions escalated. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department ordered protesters to disperse and warned they would face arrest or use of force if they did not. Officers shot tear gas canisters into the crowd as protesters retreated. Trump signed a memo around 6 p.m. Pacific ordering 2,000 National Guard members to Los Angeles to protect federal officers conducting immigration operations over the objections of California Governor Gavin Newsom and Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass. And again, we'll get into the specifics of that. As night fell, protesters in the Sheriff's Department continued to clash in Compton, across the Los Angeles River from the Home Depot and Paramount. Officers shot flashbang grenades and rubber bullets at the protesters, who threw rocks, glass bottles, and fireworks at the officers. In the evening, here, we've got some footage there. In the evening, the LA Police Department declared an unlawful assembly for a block in downtown LA that included the Metropolitan Detention Center, a site of protests over the past 2 days. Officials ordered protesters to disperse. Sunday, June 8th, roughly 20 National Guard troops arrived outside the Metropolitan Detention Center on Sunday morning, while the rest of downtown Los Angeles was largely quiet. Roads near the center and other federal buildings were closed. Okay, so again, a visual timeline of what happened on Friday and yesterday. So let's get to the actual deployment of the Guard and why this is such a big deal. National Guards to deploy to LA as more protests are planned. Protests over immigration raids in LA area are set to continue for a 3rd day. Governor Gavin Newsom said Trump's decision to call in National Guards was, quote, purposefully inflammatory. Here's the latest. Further protests against immigration raids were scheduled to take place in the Los Angeles area on Sunday, hours after Trump took the extraordinary action of ordering at least 2,000 National Guard members to assist immigration agents clashing with demonstrators. The announcement on late Saturday by Trump, who said that any protest or act of violence that impeded officials would be considered a, quote, form of rebellion, end quote. And again, just imagine, couldn't we say the same thing about the January 6th insurrection? Would Trump hold that standard? No, of course not. Was an escalation that put Los Angeles squarely at the center of tensions over his administration's immigration crackdown and made rare use of federal powers to bypass the authority of California's Governor Gavin Newsom. Trump praised the National Guard for their work in Los Angeles overnight, but Mayor Karen Bass reminded residents that the troop had not arrived. So this is the other thing we'll get into, and I'll show you the tweets. Trump is either just pathologically dishonest or visibly confused, perhaps both. He is both a liar and a moron. You never know with him. It could be, and at any point, it could be one or the other. He was praising the National Guard. Hell yeah, you crushed those protesters. You quelled the uprising. You quelled the protests. And apparently it was the work of basically local law enforcement and state officials and not the National Guard because they had not arrived yet. So he basically shot himself in the proverbial foot, right? Because it looks like local law enforcement was able to get this under control before your guard showed up. And so you're giving them credit for things they didn't do, thus undermining the need for them to be there in the first place. But again, too stupid or dishonest to recognize that. We'll continue. As of around 7 a.m. on Sunday, the streets were quiet. Protests against immigration raids were expected to continue for a third day, with one event at City Hall set for 2 p.m. local. On Saturday, law enforcement officers faced off with hundreds of protesters for a second consecutive day in the LA area, in some cases using rubber bullets and flashbang grenades. Governor Newsom described Trump's order as, quote, purposefully inflammatory, saying that the federal government was mobilizing the National Guard, quote, not because there's a shortage of law enforcement, but because they want a spectacle. The Trump administration's top law enforcement official in Southern California said in an interview on Saturday night that National Guard troops would arrive in Los Angeles within 24 hours. At least 20 people were arrested on Saturday, mostly in the largely Latino and working-class suburb of Paramount, in addition to the more than 100 people arrested at protests on Friday. Protests have broken out in the LA area on Friday and Saturday as federal agents mounted raids on workplaces in search of undocumented immigrants. The LAPD detained a number of protesters near the Metropolitan Detention Center in downtown Los Angeles on Saturday, but said demonstrations in the city were peaceful. So according to LAPD, these things are mostly peaceful. And I know there's a meme associated with it, but the truth is they have been. This is their statement. Oh my God. I have to zoom in. Okay. This is from June 7th. Today, demonstrations across the city of Los Angeles remained peaceful, and we commend all those who exercise their First Amendment rights responsibly. The Los Angeles Police Department appreciates the cooperation of organizers, participants, and community partners who helped ensure public safety throughout the day. While today's events concluded without incident, the LAPD remains fully prepared to respond swiftly and appropriately to any potential acts of civil unrest. Our commitment to safeguarding the rights, safety, and well-being of all Angelenos continues day and night. We will maintain a heightened readiness posture and remain ready to ensure the continued safety of our communities. Okay? So, some of the protests that broke out in other areas, including Compton and Paramount, south of downtown Los Angeles, were more confrontational. Demonstrators near a freeway entrance threw fireworks and rocks at police officers who responded with volleys of rubber projectiles. Some took over an intersection after setting a car ablaze, while others hurled glass bottles with a substance that smelled like gasoline at a police line as fires burned the street. Here's what's else to know. Workplace raids. The recent raids appear to be part of a new phase of the Trump administration's immigration crackdown, in which officials say they will increasingly focus on workplaces. Federal powers. Trump's order is the first time since 1965 that a president has activated the state's National Guard force without a request from that state's governor, according to Elizabeth Grotine, senior director at the Liberty and National Security Program at the Brennan Institute for Justice, an independent law and policy organization. Rating blame. Some of California's Democratic lawmakers blasted Trump's decision to send in the National Guard as an inappropriate use of power, while Republicans criticized the state's political leadership over their handling of the protests. Latino communities. Some of the most active protests against immigration raids took place in Paramount, a small city some 25 miles outside the Hollywood sign that has for decades attracted Latino immigrants. Got some other, like I said, things to look at here. Let's see. Okay, start with this one here. We got the again. This is the LA Police Department referring to like the downtown protests as being peaceful. Harry Sisson took the screenshot from Trump. Great job by the National Guard in Los Angeles after 2 days of violence, clashes, and unrest. We have an incompetent governor and mayor who were, as usual, look at how they handled the fires and now their very slow permitting disaster. Federal permitting is complete, unable to handle the task. These radical left protests by instigators and often paid troublemakers will not be tolerated. Also, from now on, masks will not be allowed to be worn at protests. What do these people have to hide and why? Again, thank you to the National Guard for a job well done. Except the National Guard weren't there at the time. So again, just a pathological liar or a moron, either way, totally undercutting the idea that they are necessary, at least based on previous days in the first place, number one. Number two, the president doesn't have the authority to just order people not to wear masks. That's strange. And number three, this is a big one. Many ICE officers wear masks to prevent people from publicly identifying them. Interesting. Mask for me, but not for thee, that sort of thing. Again, Harry Sisson points out in another clip that Trump just thanked the National Guard for a job well done, but we've actually seen them just arrive here this morning, so they weren't there to do the thing that he's given them credit for. Governor Gavin Newsom is also calling this out. For those keeping track, Trump's National Guard had not been deployed on the ground when he posted that unhinged message. Again, totally undercutting his own position. Ben Meiselas of Midas Touch, an attorney, is pointing this out, that 10 U.S. Code Section 12406, which Donald Trump just invoked to federalize the National Guard, states, quote, orders for these purposes shall be issued through the governors of the states, end quote. That did not occur. The memo under the statute is invalid on its face, suggesting that potentially Trump is doing this on illegal grounds. Again, going back to Governor Gavin Newsom, as the federal government conducts chaotic immigration sweeps across the country, the state is deploying additional CHP to maintain safety in Los Angeles highways to keep the peace. It's not their job to assist in federal immigration enforcement. The federal government is sowing chaos so they can have an excuse to escalate. That is not the way any civilized country behaves. The Secretary of Defense is now threatening to deploy active duty Marines on American soil against its own citizens. This is deranged behavior, so Governor Newsom is having a back and forth with Defense Secretary and former Fox News host Pete Hegseth, probably over Signal. Knowing Hegseth, it's probably a group chat. And then, if you just look at Trump National Guard, man, tweets everywhere. And unfortunately, this has a lot of support. So listen, yesterday, I did one video, but I mostly took the day off. So I was not religiously following the protest. Now, I have no doubt that there will be clashes of some sort of violent nature during large-scale protests. That it seems very likely. But we also have pretty compelling evidence that for the most part, most of the protests were peaceful. Now, if you break the law, you should be held accountable, okay? Even if it's for the most righteous cause. I do think that ICE is overstepping. They've really gone out of their way under Tom Homan and others, under this administration, Stephen Miller and others, to try to resemble fascistic, jackboots, right? But the law is the law, right? So again, if you break the law, I understand that you would be arrested appropriately. But this really does seem like a transparent attempt to escalate. Trump is invoking, first he was talking about invoking the Insurrection Act, which is something he's reportedly wanted to do for months and months and months, and Stephen Miller has discussed as well. In this case, they invoke a law that hasn't been deployed for decades to try to bypass the governor to deploy the National Guard. And it does seem like a major escalation. Because again, Trump is saying, hey, the National Guard, man, holy shit, you guys took care of this yesterday. Good for you, except they weren't there to take care of it. So it was local law enforcement that got the job done to Trump's satisfaction, which means there is no need, at least as of this moment, to deploy the National Guard. Maybe there will be later. Maybe this shit is going to get wildly out of control and indefensibly violent. But it hasn't yet. When it's gotten violent, the violence has been quelled without the need to send in the National Guard. And the last thing I'll say, when Donald Trump was president last, there was a major violent attack in the United States in Donald Trump's last few days in office, last couple of weeks in office. Huge. It made headlines everywhere. It was January 6th, the insurrection that Donald Trump fomented. And unlike California, see, in the 50 states, all 50 states have a state guard, a National Guard, and they do operate under dual authority. So I live in North Carolina. North Carolina's National Guard simultaneously takes orders from the governor, Josh Stein, and the president, in this case, Donald Trump. Now, basically, the vast majority of it is done by the governor, right? The president's basically supposed to stay out of the National Guard's business unless the governor requests that the president take control, or you invoke something like the Insurrection Act or this rarely invoked law to try to bypass the governor in a state of extraordinary emergency. This is not a state of extraordinary emergency. Maybe it will be, but it is not now. And Gavin Newsom, the other co-equal authority over the National Guard, does not support this. And the evidence is, as of this moment, local law enforcement was getting the job done. On January 6, 2021, local law enforcement was overwhelmed. And they were begging Trump to call off the rioters, the insurrectionists attacking the Capitol in his name. And Trump, because this was in Washington, D.C., he doesn't have to share authority over the D.C. National Guard. The D.C. National Guard is the only National Guard unit in the country that answers exclusively to the President of the United States, at the time, Donald Trump. So what's funny is the very same people who lie for Trump and say, Donald Trump wanted to deploy the National Guard on January 6th, but them there Nancy Pelosi and them there Mayor D.C. Mayor Bowser, they kept Donald Trump from deploying the National Guard. He tried, but they stopped him because they're bigger and badder and stronger than he is. Number one, so funny. It's like, I thought Donald Trump was a strong man, and he's going to be bullied around by Nancy Pelosi and Muriel Bowser. Seems to be a contradiction there, number one. Number two, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi at the time, and Muriel Bowser, the D.C. mayor, are not in the chain of command for the National Guard. So D.C. was the one area that, legally speaking, Donald Trump could deploy the Guard, and everyone else in D.C., Speaker of the House, Vice President, Senate Majority Leader, Senate Minority Leader, House Minority Leader, D.C. Mayor, D.C. Chief of Police, all of them could have in unison said, no, Mr. President, you can't do this. And Trump could have legally given them the finger and said, I'm doing it anyway, because they do not exist in the chain of command. They have no say. They have no say. Here, Gavin Newsom has say. He's supposed to have co-equal authority. And he's saying, don't do this because we've got it under control. And Trump's defying it. So when it mattered most, Trump refused to deploy the National Guard. He sat on his fat orange ass for 3 hours and watched the insurrection unfold on January 6th and didn't do a damn thing, despite people begging him to step in, Republicans and Democrats. Here, local law enforcement has this pretty well managed, or at least did on Friday and Saturday. And the local leaders and the Democratic governor are begging him to stay out. It's a hilarious contrast. Donald Trump loves violence as long as it's his violent supporters engaging in violence on his behalf to try to overthrow a free and fair election and install him to a second unelected term. Here, he's looking for any excuse to flex and, on Gavin Newsom and Democrats and protesters as well in an authoritarian power grab. Now, I don't know what will happen today. It's entirely possible that today will deviate meaningfully from what happened yesterday. But as of Friday and Saturday, there is no predicate that justifies what Trump is doing here. And it once again demonstrates his terrible, terrible priorities. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.